That's not a formation. That's a verdict. Lieutenant Darnik Vol's voice cut through the Arctic command room like a fault line cracking under ice. Everyone turned toward the primary heads-up display, where Jupiter's orbit was no longer empty. 300 Vren warships held position in a perfect trident formation, their hulls angled like serrated knives, pointed directly at Earth's throat. The sensor feeds lagged for half a second, then caught up. Every ship tagged, cross-referenced, and confirmed. Battleships with hull bracing the color of dead coral, carrier barges bristling with hangar folds, missile frigates orbiting their command spire like obedient hounds. Commander Torin Vald didn't blink. His boots remained planted on the ferroceramic deck, arms folded as he watched the tactical map crawl update by update. Beside him, heat from the wall-mounted vent systems offered a stark contrast to the reality unfolding 10 minutes past real-time in space. Jupiter's amber stripes glowed in the background of every display, indifferent to the storm rising behind them. He finally spoke. "Have they said it yet?" "No, sir," Vol replied, "but comms just pinged a directed packet stream." The room held its breath, not because of fear, but because timing mattered now. Every movement would be weighed and filed in Vren records. Every delay, every misstep, every unnecessary glance would be labeled a weakness. Seconds passed. The command room lights dimmed as the primary display shifted to full-screen broadcast. The face of Admiral Clythe of the Vren filled the wall. Thin-skinned, ridged along the temples, and eerily motionless. His eyes were set too wide apart for comfort, their pale pupils dilated as if searching for resistance. His voice, however, had been engineered for impact. Sharp consonants snapped through the room like broken glass. "Inhabitants of Sol, you are surrounded. You will surrender your defense systems, submit your labor forces, and dismantle your orbital infrastructure. You have 72 Earth hours. Failure to comply will result in planetary subjugation. This is your only offer." The screen blinked off before a single breath was drawn in the room. Someone coughed. Another shifted in his seat, but no one spoke. Until the system timestamp reappeared, Torn broke the silence with a single order. "Switch to Protocol Ether." And just like that, United Defense Command vanished from all networks. Every public transmission was cut. UDC's Arctic bunker shut itself off from civilian grids, satellite relays, and external feeds. Lights dimmed into battle state red. Command decks vibrated gently as hardened systems went underground. Data, vaults, thermal barriers, internal shielding. In the freezing dark, Earth became quiet. The technicians returned to their stations. Generals across 4 continents confirmed readiness via quantum-tethered bursts. Torin said nothing more. There was no speech. No counter-broadcast. The Vren would hear nothing but static. He turned to face Vol. "Get me a feed from Mars. Highest latency acceptable. I want full-spectrum imaging on outposts Gamma and Theta." Vol didn't ask why. He just obeyed. 10 minutes later, the feeds came in. Lagged by distance, jittered from Vren interference, but unmistakable. First came Theta. Its outer towers were glowing. Overloaded, no movement. The atmospheric pressure monitors had flatlined. Power conduits ruptured like veins. A research array tumbled silently across the ridge of the canyon it once studied. Then King Gamma. It was gone. Not burning, not collapse. Erased. From the command console, Tactical Officer Ren Dask's jaw locked. 1,400 assigned staff, he said quietly. All presumed gone. No one answered. No one flinched. Torin slowly placed his gloves on the ledge, fingers flexing against the cold alloy. He nodded once to himself, then turned toward the internal lift, speaking without looking back. "I want all drone routes updated and authorized under Black Script. Civilian authorities are to initiate sub-level evac orders, quietly. Ground-based weapon systems remain on hold until I say otherwise." And Stiletto? Vol asked. Wormit. The lift closed behind him. The hallway down to Earth's command vault was long, deliberately so. Every footstep reminded officers of what they were walking toward. There were no windows here, no ornamentation, just recessed wall panels, dull light, and the quiet hush of a system waiting to be asked for violence. Inside the vault, a curved table awaited. Embedded screens flared awake as Torin approached. His palm print unlocked deeper strata of information. Civilian evacuation logs, drone clusters embedded in Saturn's debris lanes, power redirection nodes in the Andean batteries. Torin keyed up the latest report on Project Stiletto. 200,000 drones. No guidance AI, no command feed, each one a needle of fused carbon with a thermal warhead at the base and a navigation suite modeled after insect flight. Dozens hidden in craters. Thousands scattered in Kuiper arc fields, all dark, all waiting. The chair groaned beneath him as he sat. He tapped one console. The status screen flickered. Stiletto swarm. Battle station. Not yet, he whispered. Outside, the sky remained clear. Aurora curtains rippled across the Arctic horizon, green and blue folding into violet. The reinforced walls of the bunker didn't let the cold in, but men still felt it in their bones, like an instinct. Back in the Situation Room, Vol watched the countdown begin. 71 hours, 51 minutes. The static transmission Earth had chosen to return played on loop. A mixture of white noise distortions, layered with faint auditory pulses, recorded from early 21st century seismic events. It didn't mean anything, that was the point. To the Vren it might sound like confusion, or delay, or fear, but Vol knew better. He remembered the unification wars, resource strikes in Asia, cyber sieges in Brazil, nuclear diplomacy between fractured blocks. He remembered how Earth learned to survive not through treaties, but through attrition and aftermath. "Sir," came Dask's voice, breaking through his thoughts. "A second fleet has just broken formation, looks like a scout pattern, possibly a recon probe for interorbital mapping." Torin's voice returned through the internal relay, quiet and clipped. "Let them chart whatever they want. Our strength isn't in orbit, it's waiting in the dust." Vol glanced again at the image of the Vren formation. Each vessel hovered like a closed fist, waiting to strike. He leaned back in his chair and muttered under his breath, quietly, bitterly, and with the certainty of someone who had seen too much history not to know the truth. "They think silence means surrender." A pause. "Now they'll learn what it actually means." Feed 6. Zoom and enhance by 30. Commander Torin Volt leaned forward, elbows braced, on the reinforced edge of the command table. The feed adjusted with a twitch of his finger, showing what looked like a drifting grain of stone against Jupiter's light. Just a pebble, tumbling unnoticed in the orbital debris field. Until it wasn't. A silent flash, then another. The Vren destroyer Trakal's arm lost thrust. Its rear stabilizers cracked sideways, venting coolant that froze into jagged spirals. The ship tilted, spun, and sheared into two. Bol exhaled through his teeth. "First kill logged, signal confirms, Stiletto swarm is active." That was a directed burst from fragment field Gamma 19. Torin didn't move. "Second and third? Already en route. Projected trajectories inbound from lunar crater nests, 0 deviation." The second strike arrived a moment later. Another destroyer, clearing gate, cut through by a single impact that hit beneath its armor ridge. Its thermal shielding failed instantly, and the internal detonation chain ran through 6 decks before the structure began to fold. A fireball erupted into open space, spiraling wreckage into the shadow line of Ganymede. Earth said nothing. The Vren, for the first time in 2 weeks, sent a distress ping. Not to Earth, but within their own fleet. Torin leaned back into his chair, the dim overhead lights reflecting off the frost still clinging to his collar. 3 strikes, all successful. Confirm trajectory collapse and feed real-time to ground batteries. Gasks keyed the console with 2 fingers. Ground unit standing by. Reactivation authorization pending next phase. Oren turned to Intelligence Chief Tarn, broad-shouldered, eyes glassy from staring too long at lightless maps. I want Vren traffic decoded and filtered. Focus on command relays and logistical requests. We won't hit targets we don't understand. Tarn didn't blink. Already sorting, their structures more rigid than we assumed. Supply freighters are locking pattern too close to carriers. If we isolate the routes, they won't adapt quickly enough. Good, Torin said. Find their blind spots. The Arctic bunker vibrated slightly under another systems shift. Deep within the infrastructure, the Meg-City evacuation triggers were issuing encrypted silent orders. Trains rerouted underground, power grids redirected. Above, civilians felt only brief power flickers, nothing alarming. But deep below, entire cities had started to vanish from surface visibility. In Central Asia, floodlights went out across farmland districts, masking highway movements. In Old North America, bunkers that hadn't opened since the 2094 fractures now drank in full populations. The world was not panicked. It was preparing. Torin reviewed the last civilian intake reports. Status on Karachi sectors? Group Delta transferred, Group Theta still inbound through coastal tunnel nets, said Vol, eyes skimming the incoming data stream. Minimal delay, no open distress calls. Keep it that way. The longer we look dormant, the harder they'll push. He turned his eyes toward the blank display that still transmitted Earth's looped white noise. It wasn't just for misdirection. There were embedded cues layered inside. Compression waves shaped to disrupt signal routing for Concord tech. It didn't jam, it distracted. Misdirection wasn't always about lies. Sometimes, it was about letting the enemy imagine their own truths. Far beyond Luna, inside asteroid drift cluster Echo 9, dormant war drones began to stir. There was no engine noise, just motion. Faint magnetic pushes, sharp trajectory shifts. Each drone looked like a sliver of rock designed for deception. On the inside, however, were miniaturized fission charges and auto-guidance programming keyed to gravitational anomalies. They had no cockpits, no pilots, no personality cores. They were knives in a frozen sheath, and they were beginning to leave it. Inside the Arctic Command, the temperature dropped another half degree, not from malfunction. Efficiency protocols rerouted thermal buffers to conserve for defense systems. Torin watched the internal map. Red Vrin supply routes were now flashing with yellow indicators. Irregular delays, path halts, cargo pings missing expected handoffs. Tarn's voice came through again. They've got a blind spot on their northern echelon. Their routing core is built on pre-mapped grav paths. They're not correcting for swarm movement. That's going to cost them. Torin tapped the side of the console. Begin deployment of decoy satellites. Fire them in the same arc as orbital debris from Outpost Gamma. I want them mistaken for fallout. You're not worried they'll notice the signature trails? Asked Dasks. I'm counting on them noticing. It'll waste their next 2 scan cycles recalibrating. That's time we need. From behind, Vol brought up a new screen. Sir, secondary relay from Vren command vessel. They've increased patrol drone coverage by 18% and changed their idle ping frequencies. They're hunting ghosts. Should we alter Stiletto flight patterns to compensate? Torin shook his head. No. Let them run themselves tired. We haven't even begun the real disruption. 3 hours later, the UDC's hardened data core signaled phase realignment. 8 new drone units had slipped past the edge of Vren recon coverage. 5 had embedded themselves beneath orbital wreckage from their own destroyed ships. 1, just 1, attached itself to the rear of a logistics cruiser bound for refueling. Not a single alarm was raised. Tarn's smile was thin. They're expecting a message. They're still waiting for surrender negotiations. Torin's answer came without pause. Then let them keep waiting. He stood slowly, the chair scraping softly behind him as he turned toward the room. All eyes turned with him. They think stillness means we're stalling. They think silence means we're disorganized. They're staring right at the storm, but they don't feel the wind yet. He took a long breath, letting the tension slow his words. Start clocking response times, chart panic drift. We don't need to destroy their fleet to win. We just need to make them doubt their own systems. Because the moment they stop trusting each other, this isn't a siege. It's a fracture. Silence answered him, but it wasn't fear. It was readiness. Outside, the northern lights swirled across a frozen sky. But inside the Earth's final line of defense, machines were waking, targets were shifting, and the swarm was no longer sleeping. Goran Valt entered the subterranean archive chamber just as the temperature dipped another 2 degrees. The condensation along the sealed glass server pillars wasn't from environmental malfunction. It was deliberate, designed to chill and stabilize older quantum logs before retrieval. Inside, Chief Analyst Jarek Duval hunched over a grid panel surrounded by handheld spectrometers, field readers, and data thread coils. He looked like a mechanic tearing into an alien reactor with nothing but wire and willpower. No one else had clearance to work on Vrentech this close. Duval didn't ask for help. He demanded silence and exact margins, and only Torin's boots against the steel-rung floor dared to interrupt his calculations. As they stopped transmitting on frequency vector 36B, Duval muttered without turning. That's the one they use for internal munitions logging. Torin's brow tightened. Scrambling logs doesn't hide the problem, it exposes it. Duval slid a hexagon-shaped screen across the surface and pulled up a rotating schematic of a Vren antimatter pod. Its containment rings flickered with timestamp overlays decoded from a destroyed cruiser fragment retrieved near Titan. You see this outer seal? Duval tapped twice. It's tied to a modulated electromagnetic stabilizer. That thing keeps the core from eating itself. And here's the fun part. He reached toward a panel and activated a test loop simulation. An artificial EM spectrum flooded the chamber's display unit, showing its effect on the stabilizer ring. Within 7 seconds, the coil began to spasm, shake, then collapse inward. The simulated warhead didn't detonate, but it fizzled, unstable and twitching, unusable. Doran stepped closer. The display cast a blue flicker over his cheek, but his eyes stayed anchored to the result. What frequency caused that? Between 9.7 and 10.1 terahertz. Uncommon, naturally occurring only during surface-level lightning storms on Venus, but we can replicate it. He turned slowly. You're telling me we can scramble their antimatter pods? With sound? Duval grinned. Tired and sharp, not sound, frequency, signature. If we embed it within a false beacon array and use Stiletto's dispersal protocols, they'll think it's a power bleed from our systems. They'll detect it, investigate, and destabilize themselves, trying to trace it. Torn didn't reply right away. He walked to the back wall, running his glove across the cold metal. His thoughts turned tactical. How many targets? What distribution arc? What delay window? Then came the critical question. Does it trigger a full explosion? No. But it kills the weapon's balance. If the core's disturbed while powering up, it'll short out. Worst case, it'll cause a chain breach that melts the chamber. Best case? They try to jettison it and take out half their cruiser with the attempt. Torin looked over his shoulder. How long to load it into a looped carrier burst? Duval checked a separate unit, flipping a switch that sent faint vibrations through the floor as a directional transmitter powered up. I can build a prototype signal in 20 minutes, but it'll be useless unless the Vren are actively scanning for tech anomalies. We'll have to bait them. Then let's give them something worth hunting. Back in the central strategy core, the looped, static Earth had been transmitting was altered. Not by tone, not by volume, by shape. A 3-second fragment now carried an embedded EM pulse that mimicked reactor emissions. Not enough to trace, but more than enough to register as unnatural. Over the next hour, Varin's signal interception units logged the pattern 5 times. An alert was sent to 3 separate command groups within the fleet. One of them flagged the anomaly as potential weapon diagnostics, a term the Concorde treated as a high-threat priority. Tarn, hunched beside the comms desk, raised his eyes from the feed as the message was decrypted. "They think we're about to launch a prototype." Torin gave a single nod. "Good. Send an intercepted chatter fragment. Edit in our language. Just one phrase." Tarn's brow furrowed. "Which phrase?" Torin answered without hesitation. "Testing acceleration coil integrity. Repeat, sequence unstable." In the Vren carrier cluster, near Saturn's outer ring, Admiral Clith received the garbled message through a third-party packet tracer. The Concorde's translation interface rendered it clumsily into Vren syntax. But one idea came through clearly. Human weapon development. Unstable output. Testing soon. His mandibles clenched. He waved a claw at the nearest aide, then barked something that sent 4 monitoring crews scrambling to adjust signal filters. Back on Earth, Tarn turned from the desk. "They've repositioned 7 ships to higher orbit. They're moving assets away from their own antimatter cores." "Why retreat from power banks unless you fear detonation?" Dask murmured. "They don't trust their own gear anymore," Torin said. "We didn't hit them. We made them doubt the one thing they thought they controlled." Duval entered just as a new report came through. "Admiral," he said, voice low, "we might have something better than a misfire." Torin looked at him. Duval placed a capsule reader on the desk, inside a fragment of Vren reactor alloy scavenged from the wreckage of the Kirin Gate. During the drone strike, their containment fields tried to auto-correct when they read a thermal echo. That same echo occurred naturally on our lunar deployment plates. It isn't just our fake signal, it's the materials themselves. Dasks blinked. "Wait. Earth-made materials are passively destabilizing their systems?" "Not just destabilizing," Duval replied. "They're mimicking feedback that the Vrin systems interpret as critical overload. These aren't attacks, they're warnings. From the enemy's perspective, our systems look like we're failing to contain something huge. Something we don't understand." Torin leaned back against the edge of the console and folded his arms. "We're not broadcasting power, we're broadcasting incompetence. And they think it's hiding a superweapon," Duval said. For a moment, no one spoke. Then Torin stepped forward. "I want 6 fake beacons launched, 1 per orbital quadrant, dispersal vector masked as reactor spillage. Duval, simulate core bleeds. Dasks, coordinate with ground assets to leak ghost signatures along orbital mining lines. Tarn, send a corrupted burst through captured Vren channels. Let them believe they cracked it themselves." Tarn hesitated. "You think they'll buy it?" "They already did," Torin replied. "You saw what they moved. They think we built something we can't handle." Duval nodded slowly. "They're not afraid of what we know. They're afraid we already lost control of it." As the false signatures were deployed, Vren alert statuses rose. Logistic paths shifted. Diagnostic pods were launched toward Earth's debris belt. They didn't attack. They scanned. And every second they spent analyzing fiction, Earth bought another second to make it real. The first detonation didn't register as an attack. Vren's sensor logs tagged it as a reactor surge from a damaged frigate floating in Station Quadrant 5. The thermal spike flared, then vanished, swallowed in the noise of orbital debris. 4 seconds later, 2 more signatures blinked into existence, then exploded inside the supply cluster known as Holdpoint Varal. Commander Torin Volt watched the feed from Earth's subterranean command vault without blinking. A wide-field composite displayed Saturn's upper orbit, now streaked with shockwave vectors and wreckage drift lines. The targeting had been deliberate, not to strike ships directly, but to rupture the zones where antimatter stockpiles had been anchored. "Chain reaction confirmed," said Chief Analyst Tarn, voice low. "Secondary cores venting into formation spine. 71 ships disabled. Internal fires on 19 more. That's just the first sweep. They're not even returning fire, said Dasks, his breath held a second too long. Torin nodded slowly, because they don't know what hit them. The Stiletto drones hadn't targeted hulls. That would have been expected. Instead, they had intercepted the orbital anchor lines feeding into reserve containment tanks, storage vessels floating tethered in silent position above the fleet's supply armada. When those containers ruptured, they released volatile fuel into a web of overlapping energy fields. The blast didn't spread outward like a traditional explosion. It folded through the fleet's internal systems, scrambling field regulators, triggering panic reboots, collapsing power grids. From a tactical view, it looked like the Vren had accidentally set themselves on fire. Torin shifted his focus to the upper telemetry charts. How long before containment protocols attempt compensation? Duval responded without looking away from his console. They already tried. Autonomous stabilizers misread the bursts as core failures and initiated an emergency purge. That dumped antimatter back into active zones. The computer logic just made everything worse. Good, Torin said. Deploy the second wave. High above Saturn, debris glistened against the gas giant's reflective haze. Antimatter container remnants spiraled like shattered mirrors. Several Vrin carriers had flipped axis to counteract stabilizer torque, venting coolant into open drift corridors. Uncontrolled reactors spat light across every quadrant. Then came the second stage. Stiletto drones from Belt Rotation Cluster Beta 6 fired micro-warheads directly at remaining relay buoys. These weren't explosive in the conventional sense. They scattered charged filaments designed to replicate the earlier, unstable frequency Earth had broadcast. To Vren systems, it looked like Earth's weapon had just reached critical mass. The fleet didn't regroup. It fractures. Plith's command vessel Spear of Anhur spun 90 degrees and retreated behind Saturn's outer dust curtain. 15 ships followed it. 76 more broke formation entirely, scattering into orbital peripheries. A few even drifted without propulsion, not out of strategy, but due to internal silence. Their cores had gone dark. Vren command chatter is in full override, Tarn said. Multiple captains issuing conflicting orders, some calling for retreat, some blaming internal sabotage. Clith hasn't spoken since the second surge. They think they triggered it themselves, Duval murmured. They don't even know Earth acted. Torin folded his arms. That's the point. Let them keep wondering. The Arctic command chamber was silent except for the constant stream of data scrolling across auxiliary screens. No cheers, no applause, just coordination. From the global mesh, evacuation status continued without incident. Underground cities in Canada, Eastern Europe, and Northern India now registered at 92% civilian capacity. Communications remained locked. No messages had gone out. Earth to outside observers remained voiceless, watching quietly as its enemies unraveled. Dasks turned unsure. Should we issue a demand now? Force a withdrawal? Torin's response came cold. They expected demands. They expected negotiations. Every species they've conquered begged. That's the rhythm they understand. We offer none. The looped static continued broadcasting from Earth's orbital satellites, a fractured pattern embedded with nonsensical spikes and whitewashed noise. But the Vren believed they were decoding something urgent. Something unstable. And they were right. Just not in the way they thought. Back near Saturn, Vren command teams attempted emergency recalibrations. Admiral Clith ordered half of his reserve fleet to regroup behind Ringline Theta, hoping to use Saturn's magnetic curtain as both cover and shielding, but the repositioning only exposed his transport line to the still-moving Stiletto remnants. Drones too small to register, too numerous to track. 7 more supply carriers detonated, one after another in total silence. Clith's voice finally returned to the fleet-wide comms. Severe inner lines, break from ring orbit, disengage from current alignment. Send full tactical data back to Concord Command. This is no longer containment, this is invasion preparation. But no one acknowledged. Several subordinate ships had already gone silent, their captains choosing to drift behind moons or power down rather than be next in the line of Earth's unspoken retribution. Back in the UDC vault, Tarn leaned forward. Intercepted message. One of their scout frigates claims Earth is using forbidden planetary-class weapons. They're calling for an emergency Concord session. Torrin didn't react. Let them assemble. Let them wonder why the humans never answer. Duval stood slowly, adjusting his jacket. You think the Concord will believe them? Torrin turned to the display, where Saturn's orbit now showed pockets of still-burning wreckage and detached hulls floating through ring mist. They won't need to believe. They'll see the aftermath and choose fear over fact, and by the time they're done arguing over the weapon's origin, we'll be done moving. Dask stepped forward, quiet now. The Vren have broken off full engagement. No push forward, no new deployments. They thought we'd negotiate, Torrin said, his tone harder now. Instead, we showed them how silence speaks. The static loop continued. A meaningless broadcast to those expecting a message. A warning to those who understood what came next. Torrin Vault stepped into the comms vault, its walls embedded with noise-dampening lattice that drank every footfall. Overhead lights buzzed faintly as cooling fans pulled warmth out of the insulated walls. Cold air met his face like frost rolled from steel. He approached the central station without ceremony, gloved hand tracing the interface strip mounted into the console's edge. There were no ceremonial flags, no diplomats, no translators, just a raw link to the orbital transmission grid. Behind him, Bryn Tarn arrived carrying a secure relay core. We rerouted everything through 7 dead satellites. Message will reach all Concord military channels. It can't be traced directly. Torrin gave a single nod, adjusting the mic pickup toward him. Keep looped static on all other frequencies. No encryption tags. We want them to think it was unplanned. Tarn hesitated, a faint crease between his brows. You sure about this wording? Exactly this wording, Torrin said, adjusting the gain manually. A green light blinked above the panel. He leaned toward the recorder, his breath misting in the air. His voice was calm, dry, stripped of ceremony. Leave. Or end. Then he stepped back. The message uploaded within 5 seconds. A compression burst launched it through Earth's low-orbit reflection net, bounced off an old comms relay near Europa, and shot outward through the debris halo still drifting near Saturn. In Vren Command, Core 6, Admiral Clith watched the message arrive. The loop's static they'd grown accustomed to finally broke. 3 words. No qualifiers, no context, no signature. One of his aides repeated it aloud in Vren dialect, tone uncertain, body posture rigid. Clith didn't respond immediately. Around him, the command tier had grown restless. He noticed 2 of his sub-commanders had retracted their relay tendrils, a gesture reserved for public disagreements. The humans issued no demands, said strategist Vera. They offered no terms. This is not diplomacy. Clith stared at the static re-establishing itself across the screen. It's not a message, it's a verdict. Back on Earth, the Arctic Command was in partial blackout. Power rerouted to deep-level data banks left parts of the complex dimmed. Dust-coated pipes above the main floor dripped condensation, forming slow puddles on the steel plating. Dasks entered with a datapad, face tight. We've got full fleet telemetry. Vren vessels are scattering around Saturn's third arc. Several jumped inward toward Jupiter. A few have fully shut down power signatures. Torrin scanned the updated feed. Any indication they've received the message? They received it, interpreted it in 3 different ways. One group's bracing for attack, another believes it was a bluff, the third's calling for immediate retreat to neutral ground. Tarn leaned forward over a second console. We're down to 1,200 active Stiletto drones. Fuel reserves for redeployment are limited. We've got to start choosing where to feint and where to strike. Understood, Torrin replied. We reassign all remaining drones to ring vectors. No more autonomous engagement. From here on, everything moves in tandem. Duval, who had been silent since entering, placed a new projection on the table. If we simulate a full ignition pulse around Saturn's gravity corridor, we can project fake mass readings large enough to suggest a superweapon without triggering actual deployment. That might be enough to push the hesitant factions. Torin tapped the edge of the projection with his knuckle. We let them see shadows of weapons we don't have, because the ones they imagine are worse than what we built. Tarn exhaled slowly. And if they call the bluff? They won't, Torin said. Not after what just happened to Hold Point Viral. Not when they're still counting bodies. In orbit around Titan, where the ice moon's surface shimmered with reflected gaslight, an older human comms buoy still spun slowly. Never meant for war, only deep space survey coordination. Its lens array blinked once, then again syncing with the new looped message. The signal wasn't repeated through command structure. It was openly broadcast through channels used by colonists, researchers, traders. Earth had stopped hiding the war. It was now a statement of doctrine. Across the Concorde's edge territories, diplomatic relays blinked with the same feed. Leave or end. Ambassadors from non-aligned species froze transmission. Confederation diplomats paused mid-negotiation. Even internal Concorde councils split into isolated emergency sessions. Some called it a threat. Others called it a declaration. Only a few realized what it actually was: policy. At the UDC Arctic Vault, Duval leaned over the drone telemetry feed. Fleet-wide shift on their side. Clythe's command line is rerouting cruisers toward the far side of Saturn's rings. Formation sloppier than it's ever been. They're repositioning to stall, Dask muttered, trying to figure out if we just played our last card. Torin didn't look up. We didn't. But they think we might have. He stepped away from the command table and moved toward the wall console, calling up internal drone status. We're not bluffing them. We're giving them just enough evidence to draw their own wrong conclusions. Tarn adjusted the simulation overlays. At 1,200 drones, we're reaching the operational threshold. Beyond that, we can't run coordinated strikes without compromising patterns. Even if we hold their attention, we're almost out of material. Then we shift to manipulation, Torn replied. Fake reactor spikes, simulated internal comms, loop-edited Vren transmissions that suggest Clythe authorized retreat while denying it publicly. Make it look like fracture lines. Dasks blinked. We're pushing psychological warfare with scraps? We're past warfare, Torrin said flatly. This is doctrine enforcement now. Silence gripped the chamber again, not out of fear, but out of shared understanding. They weren't fighting the Vren anymore. They were redefining how the Vren saw Earth. 3 hours later, at Concorde High Chamber Relay Station 11, the Earth message played again. A single phrase. Stark. Undecorated. Final. Leave. Or end. Some Concorde species recoiled. Others debated its authenticity, but in every conversation, on every system, one detail stood out above the rest. It wasn't a negotiation. The first strike came without formation. Vren warships barreled through the inner orbital perimeter in scattered bursts, their propulsion patterns frantic, uncoordinated, yet massive. A swarm of 32 cruisers surged from Saturn's magnetic curtain and cut inward past Europa's gravitational slip. Clythe's order had gone through 2 minutes earlier, encoded with a single directive: overrun Earth's orbital stations, neutralize infrastructure, cripple response capability. Their hesitation had dissolved into impulse. Back on Earth, at UDC Arctic Command, the impact reports rolled in like rapid-fire blows. Shields over Station Helix B collapsed under concentrated beam fire. A debris ring formed near the South American satellite mesh as 2 defense pylons blinked off sensors within seconds. Torin Vault stood unmoving, arms folded, his silhouette framed by the large-scale orbital projection spanning the rear wall. Red indicators blinked faster than the system could resolve. Above the command floor, static crackled briefly across a speaker before fading. Another relay overloaded. "They're not testing us anymore," said Lieutenant Dask. "This is full engagement." "They're desperate," Torin replied, eyes unmoving. Goran Tarn stepped up from the lower grid console. "Station Helix B is gone. 4,000 crew lost with minimal warning. Orbital ring defenses are redirecting, but strike vectors are overlapping. It's not a surgical assault, it's brute force." Across the display, Earth's upper orbit was shifting from a defensive grid into fragmented patches of resistance. Every ring station had pivoted into manual control. Countermeasures began to fire: interception batteries, auto-circuited slug throwers, thermal deflectors, but the Vren weren't aiming at defenses anymore. They were aiming at Earth's infrastructure lifelines. Torin stepped back toward the console edge. "They're expecting us to use orbital artillery, to show our hand. That's the mistake." Duval glanced sideways. "With all respect, if we don't act, they'll rip through the mesh. Civilian data arrays, orbital stabilizers, weather control." "Not yet," Torn cut in. "We wait." A moment of silence passed. Then, Tarn looked up. "Ground-level migration has spiked. Civilian bunkering reached 98% in 12 districts. Transport tubes in motion across the eastern belts. Surface casualties are minimal. They're holding." Torin leaned over and keyed into the deep echo sensor layer. "Begin routing live visual from Kuiper array. Show them what's coming next." The wall display flickered once, then rendered a wide-angle shot from a stealth buoy hidden past Neptune's orbit. A low cluster of glinting forms appeared in slow movement. Earth's remaining 1,200 drones. Every one of them was now in realignment. High above, the orbital defense grid screamed with overlapping data. Station Thorium-3 ejected its final ballast package as 3 Vrin ships tore through its structure like hooked claws through foam plating. Automated defense towers tried to repoint, but power loss across secondary coils froze the targeting rings. A series of detonations followed, not from weapons, but from reactor implosions triggered by last-ditch overloads. None of it slowed the Vren. They expected Earth's retaliation. They expected saturation bombing. But the sky remained silent, and that absence bred fear. In the cold depths of UDC's secondary targeting chamber, a row of Earth's last remaining long-range railgun operators sat still, watching readouts. They weren't idle, they were preparing calibration sweeps for targets that didn't yet know they'd been marked. Each gun was buried beneath mountain ranges, concealed under glacial crusts. They required no moving barrels, no heated chambers. They fired tungsten core slugs at orbital velocity using magnetically charged slide columns so vast they distorted seismic sensors every time they launched. But not one had fired yet. Captain Rowan Talvik, senior gunner assigned to Antarctic Array 9, glanced up from his scope. "We're locked. Multiple targets in kinetic arc. Trajectories confirm impact range." Still, Torin's command line gave no authorization. In Arctic Command, Dask finally stepped forward. "Sir, we've lost 27% of our orbital network. Civilian comms are blacked out. If we don't act, the surface infrastructure may begin to collapse." "They expect retaliation," Torn repeated. "We're not going to satisfy that expectation." Tarn stepped forward. "Then what are we buying time for?" Torn turned fully now, stepping away from the projection table. "We've fed them a steady diet of misdirection and silence. When we hit, it has to break their understanding of us entirely. Right now, their fleet is chasing visibility. That's the only thing they've got left to target. Let them keep chasing." Duval narrowed his eyes. "And in the meantime?" "We give them something worse than pain," Torin said. "We make them wonder why it's taking so long." By midnight local bunker time, Earth's orbital map was in pieces. But within the chaos, patterns were shifting. Several Vren captains had broken from Clith's primary directive. Instead of pushing deeper, they hovered, unsure whether they had walked into a trap. A third of the fleet was still in Saturn's rear arc, too far to reinforce. They hadn't seen the ground artillery. They hadn't seen the drone clusters reposition. They'd only seen Earth take the hits without flinching. That was what unsettled them. In the far northern railgun vault, Captain Talvik received the final firing command. It didn't come with fanfare, just a light. He keyed the fire path into the main cylinder. 10 seconds later, beneath 35 feet of ice, the tungsten slug detached with enough force to fracture bedrock. A blue flash registered briefly above the peak, and then it was gone. In space, 5 seconds later, a Vren destroyer, Shrinebreaker, split down the center as the round ripped through both hull layers. Back in command, Torn observed the resulting scan data. That was a warning. The next won't be. Tarn glanced up. Fleet coordination requests just went dark. Clythe's command line has gone silent. He's not issuing further strike orders. Duval leaned forward. That wasn't a strike to him. That was proof we've been holding back. Exactly, Torn said. Now we move the drones. He keyed a command. Slow, deliberate, and 1,200 silent weapons shifted formation. Not toward the enemy, but around them. The drones crossed into the thermosphere at different angles, each no larger than a tactical rifle case, each carrying a shaped nuclear payload and a flight algorithm tuned for chaos. They didn't form a line. They didn't broadcast signals. They dropped like shrapnel spun from orbit. Too fast for tracking, too scattered for interception, too many to count. Commander Torin Vault stood beside the northern targeting relay, watching a real-time field render projected from the polar uplink dome. Altitude overlays blinked rapidly, each tagged object on the display falling through the Kármán line with unflinching descent. They've breached upper atmospheric entry, Brentarn announced, adjusting the scope filters. Impact spread will begin in 40 seconds. Torin didn't respond. He was listening. Not for sound, but for timing. On screen, the Vren warships adjusted their formation. Their shields, already disrupted from earlier kinetic collisions, could not recalibrate fast enough to match the unorthodox trajectories of the descending swarm. The first wave struck just above Earth's mesosphere, scraping into the upper armor plating of a forward Vren assault frigate. The blast fractured the bow housing, sending armor plates spinning into freefall. Seconds later, 8 more impacts hammered vessels across the same vector. Fire blossomed where antimatter cooling arrays ruptured. The fleet's organized wedge structure fractured into isolated arcs. Down in the UDC command vault, Duval's knuckles tapped against the reinforced desk edge. They're scrambling fire grids. Nothing's sinking. Their auto-circuiting can't keep up. Dask stood beside him, reading diagnostic feedback from orbital debris sensors. They're not just overwhelmed, they're blind. Our drone angles are reversing their prediction patterns. Good, Torin replied. Open the railgun channels. In Antarctica, the tundra trembled. 8 buried silos detonated their launch hatches, propelling Earth's remaining long-range slugs skyward through hollowed peaks. Each slug was 3 meters long, with a tungsten uranium composite core and an ablative casing designed to survive atmosphere re-entry in reverse. They left no trail, just a ripple, and then nothing. 5 seconds passed. In orbit, the harbinger of claim, Clythe's command vessel, registered the slug's entry on passive telemetry. 3 seconds later, it tore through the midsection of the flagship's shield matrix, sliced through the central gravity chamber, and exited out the other side, leaving a ring of shredded support architecture spiraling outward. Clythe's throne collapsed in on itself. His final command never left the bridge. Back on Earth, Torn observed the sensor signature vanish from the fleet map. Flagship is down. Tarn nodded, pale, Confirmed, no escape pods. Command deck hit dead center. Duval swallowed. Commanders will default to protocol scatter now. That's what we want, Torrin said. Fractured fleets make desperate choices. No fallback doctrine covers this kind of collapse. In orbit, the Vryn fleet lost all structure. Battleships turned away from each other, issuing conflicting pings. Several frigates jettisoned drone bays before initiating silent retreats. One vessel attempted an emergency fold jump, but collided with an unregistered mining satellite, spinning off into Saturn's influence. From Earth's surface, the sky shimmered. Nothing brilliant or theatrical, just slight flashes where orbital fragments caught atmospheric friction and burned down in silence. In Arctic Command, the drone telemetry feed showed losses climbing fast. Torrin counted 73 units remaining. Dask leaned in. That's all we've got? Torrin closed his eyes briefly. We don't need more. Several Concord communication arrays, observers stationed far outside the direct battlefield, reported incomplete readings of the engagement. They attempted live analysis, but failed to reconstruct a coherent tactical picture. All that came through was wreckage. Dozens of ships disintegrated, hundreds of readings lost. A command structure imploded with no external demands issued, no negotiation, no offer of terms. Just retaliation, brutal, measured. At UDC's data desk, Tarn compiled intercepts from surviving Vryn broadcasts. Some captains are transmitting false orders, claiming to represent a surviving Clith directive. Others are requesting emergency asylum from Concord Council. Let them fracture, Torrin answered. Their confusion is a better weapon than anything else we could launch. One operator spoke from the background. Incoming contact from our outer mesh. Multiple Vryn cruisers abandoning orbit. Unarmed, no shielding. They're not fighting back. Then we don't fire, Torrin said, stepping away from the console. Let them run. Inside the underground drone vault, the final active feed shut down. Earth's last kamikaze swarm had completed its mission. Only one remained, a damaged unit spinning slowly in low Earth orbit, transmitting static through a fractured emitter. Torrin watched its feed for several seconds. No weapon, no detonation. Just a signal caught in a dying loop. He reached forward and deactivated it. You've done enough. The thermosphere settled. The Vryn fleet, shattered and scattered, broke into unconnected remnants. Those who could escape did. Those who couldn't waited for orders that would never come. Above Earth, only broken ships drifted. Below Earth, no city had been touched. Torrin Vault didn't blink as the final fragments of the Harbinger of Claim broke apart across the orbital feed. The flagship's ruptured core split clean through by Earth's final railgun salvo, spun slowly in silence. A blinking thread of static crossed the screen. Then, nothing. He gave a brief nod and turned away. Cease pursuit. All drones stand down. Lock satellite formations into dormant state. Power down firing lines. We're finished. Across the room, Dask straightened. You're sure? They've lost structure, command, and direction, Torrin said. Any further fire would be indulgence, and Earth. At the edge of the command vault, Tarn tapped his console twice, watching satellite feeds flicker back into neutral alignment. Last Vryn vessel exited engagement radius 10 minutes ago. They're scattering across Kuiper, uncoordinated. We're not being followed. Torrin approached the elevated display panel, now filled with static-ridden orbital stills. He selected 5 of the cleanest images, one of the Harbinger's rupture, another of drone wave descent, and 3 showing Vryn vessels drifting disabled across thermospheric range. Package these visuals, strip all metadata, public channels only, no commentary, just fact. Duval folded his arms. You're opening the blackout? Torrin looked over his shoulder. Every civilian in the system deserves to see the price of being underestimated. Within hours, Earth's global mesh lit up. Footage of the orbital collapse, played on loop in every underground city, every defense post, every remaining surface-level facility. The people saw the wreckage. They saw the drones. They saw the Vrin running. Not a single image bore Earth's flag. There were no speeches, no celebratory markers. Just silence and aftermath. In Johannesburg Sub-Tier 3, thousands gathered around the primary screen banks, watching slow-motion shots of orbital slugs shattering enemy vessels. In New Kyoto's Deep Tunnel Plaza, hands gripped railings as the Harbinger's last transmission cut out mid-command. And in the old Mumbai core, a child asked aloud what no one else could. Why didn't they answer? His father's reply came slowly, roughened by age and the weight of what he'd just witnessed. Because we don't waste words where endings are earned. In Concord High Council, Archive 13, the emergency quorum met under coded silence. Reports from the Saturn engagement filled data slates, stacked unread. No species in the chamber volunteered to speak first. A quorum aide finally whispered what no one wanted to formalize. We have no method to retaliate without risking collapse. Someone else added, if Earth responds again, we don't survive it. Later that same day, Concord Order Sigma 12 was approved. Earth was designated a quarantined emergent system. No contact, no observation, no incursion, no challenge. Not out of diplomacy, out of fear. At UDC command, hours later, Torren stood before the central staff. No formality, no ceremony. The war room was half-lit, data displays muted. Everyone was waiting for what Earth's highest commander would declare. He faced them with hands bare. No data pad, no monitor. Just the room. There were no treaties, he began. No armistice, no peace summit. They gave us an ultimatum. We gave them the consequence of mistaking Earth's silence for permission. He walked once around the edge of the floor, pacing slowly. Never again will Earth reply to threats like a petitioner. Never again will we open dialogue with anyone who assumes we must justify our right to exist. He turned to face them fully. Earth has no obligation to explain itself to the galaxy. We built in silence. We fortified without fanfare. And we retaliated with finality. That is not cruelty. That is clarity. He paused, then said it plainly. Our policy going forward is simple. We do not negotiate with those who bring demands. We end them. No applause followed. None was needed. Every officer, technician, and strategist understood exactly what had been forged. In the weeks that followed, Earth's orbital rings were rebuilt. Not repaired, rebuilt. Layered deeper, structured colder. The drone bays beneath Luna were refitted with newer racks. Mars outposts, abandoned in ash, were reconstructed with reinforced bunkering and low-orbit kinetic screens. And on Titan, Earth's first outer defense installation was declared active, not symbolic, operational. Torren oversaw it all from the Arctic command bunker, no longer underground by necessity, but by choice. His face never appeared on broadcasts. His name was never offered to Concord officials. He remained exactly what Earth had demanded of him, silent, focused, and prepared to end the next insult before it began. Tarn stood beside him one final time, watching the drone interface light up with its new grid alignment. You think they'll come again? Torren's voice came with no hesitation. No. But someone else will. Tarn turned slightly. And what do we say when they do? Torren tapped the interface, watching a newly assembled drone swarm begin a cold flight test over the lunar dark side. We won't say anything, he said. They'll already know. The message had been broadcast once. It never needed repeating. Leave. Or end.